Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, in a landmark ruling, Kenya's High Court recognises that the forced sterilisation of women living with HIV is a violation of their human rights. Also, the ceasefire struck in November between TPLF leaders and the Ethiopian government has seen aid start to slowly trickle back into the region, helping the millions displaced by years of conflict in the region of Tigray. And an historic day. A repatriation ceremony is held in Abuja as Germany's foreign minister officially hands over 20 stolen Benin bronzes back to their homeland. But first, Kenya's High Court has recognised that the involuntary sterilisation of HIV-positive women is a human rights violation. Tuesday's landmark ruling comes after a Kenyan woman who was coerced into sterilisation by doctors in 2006 brought a case against the government in 2014. Campaigners have warned that undermining the rights of women living with HIV makes effective responses to the virus more difficult. Medin Tisau is the Kenyan country director for the United Nations Programme on HIV/AIDS, UNAID. Medin, thanks so much for speaking to me. Now, what do you see as being the significance of the Kenyan court's finding to those living with HIV/AIDS in the country?
Thank you so much for having me. And as you indicated, on Friday, the 16th of December, a judgment was made on the coercive sterilization case in Kenya. And this signifies that justice has been served on one hand. And also, it's an important step in protecting the sexual reproductive health and rights of women living with HIV. So this will provide a direction to equal rights, to family, dignity, and also the highest standards of reproductive health. And also it paves a way to addressing discrimination, HIV-related discrimination, which is basically holding us back from ending AIDS by 2030. So it is an important decision, and this has indeed brought the importance of addressing stigma and discrimination.
So one of the women who brought the case against the government was sterilised herself in the mid-2000s. How widespread was the practice, as far as you're aware then? And how much has changed in terms of the structural stigma faced by HIV sufferers since then?
The early days of the epidemic, as we all know, there was a lot of lack of awareness, but the stigma and discrimination was very much rampant. A lot has changed since, and in fact, the Kenyan government, like in many countries in the region, have put progressive policies and strategic frameworks on ending AIDS. And that is aligned to the global AIDS strategy on ending AIDS, ending inequality by 2030. So the early days, yes, we have had issues even globally. In fact, in 40 countries still, this practice exists. And it's very important to see how we can eliminate the forced sterilization. UNAIDS, with other partners, has launched a global partnership for action to eliminate all forms of HIV-related stigma and discrimination. Again, breaking down the barriers that includes removing stigma and discrimination, removing criminalization related to HIV. So there is a lot of progress that has happened. And in fact, Kenya is indeed demonstrating a good progress in terms of new HIV reduction and also creating access to services. But we can't say that stigma and discrimination is fully addressed, so we have a lot more work to do in that area.
So when you say stigma and discrimination, so we have a truly shocking, very specific case about coerced or involuntary sterilisation. But what are some of the other hurdles faced by those who are living with HIV on the continent or Kenya itself?
Yeah, so in the Global AIDS strategy, in fact, we have a very unique and very bold target that looks at the structural barriers that fuel the HIV epidemic. And that target is related to 10-10-10. So the first 10 is related to removing stigma and discrimination, because we still have a lot of people who are not accessing services, not only the sexual reproductive health, but generally health services. The second is related to removing or eliminating sexual and gender-based violence, again, another factor that fueled the epidemic. And the third 10 is related to criminalization of people because of their sexual and gender identity. So these are the critical factors that we are looking at to address through the global partnership that I alluded to earlier, and very important for women living with HIV to have access to sexual reproductive services within a non-discriminatory way. Why? Because it affects their health.
Medin
children.
Thank you so much. The Kenyan country director from UNAIDS there, responding to the Kenyan High Court's finding that forced sterilisation of women living with HIV/AIDS is in violation of their human rights. Now, after over almost a year and a half of closures, some banks in government-controlled parts of the northern Ethiopian region of Tigray have started to offer services again. A truce for 2 years of bloody civil war was struck in November, and that deal between the local TPLF leaders and the Ethiopian government has seen aid also start to trickle back in to the millions who have been displaced by the conflict. Caroline Lambole has more.
Lining up for aid, some of these people have had to flee their homes several times.
We took our children and fled. No mattresses, not even a cup of water to drink from, or anything to cook with. We're just trying to stay alive. Elderly people, mothers with their children, and many others have been through tremendous difficulties. Many have died.
In November, the Ethiopian government and Tigrayan forces agreed to cease hostilities after 2 years of war. The truce has allowed partial access for relief aid to the region of Tigray, which has been largely cut off from the outside world. Local health workers say that many facilities are out of service because of the scale of destruction. Consultations are taking place outside. Health supplies, but also food, are scarce.
Children under 5 are malnourished. We can't save some of these children. With just medicine, they need food, and we haven't received any yet. We give the children medicine, and they come back the next day in even worse shape. We know what's wrong with them, but we can't do anything about it.
The Ethiopian government has repeatedly denied blocking humanitarian supplies to the region, and it's also started supplying some aid. Thousands have been killed, millions displaced, and many more are in desperate need of food.
A repatriation ceremony was held in Nigeria's capital, Abuja, on Tuesday as Germany returned 20 stolen Benin bronzes to their homeland. The artifacts were looted by British colonialists in 1897 and sold on to museums worldwide. Sam Olakoya tells us more.
The repatriation of the 22 Benin bronzes from Germany to Nigeria is a significant step in Nigeria's campaign to take back thousands of its ancient works of art, mainly from Europe and the United States. The most important of these artifacts are the Benin bronzes, which were looted by British colonialists in 1897 from the ancient Benin Kingdom. After a lengthy negotiation between Nigeria and Germany, the European country agreed to return all 1,130 Benin bronzes in its public museums. Thousands of other Benin bronzes are still being held in museums and in private hands, mainly in Western countries, especially in Britain. Nigeria has for several years appealed to countries, institutions, museums, and private collectors holding on to these antiquities to release them. With the return of the ancient artworks from Germany, Nigeria will no doubt intensify its campaign to get back the remaining ones from other countries. the mass theft of Nigeria's antiquities by British colonialists is one of the dark sides of the country's colonial past that has persisted till this day. But as Nigeria tries to redress the injustice by getting back these materials, it faces the challenge of properly securing them. Otherwise, they may end up being stolen again, given that they are highly precious ancient works of art.
Sam Olukoya there. Now, a contemporary art gallery in Lagos is showcasing an exhibition in tribute to the hundreds of schoolgirls still missing since they were abducted by Boko Haram extremists from the Nigerian town of Chibok 8 years ago. Our correspondent in Nigeria sent us this report.
It is impossible for these women to contain their emotions in front of these sculptures. Their daughters are among the former Chibok schoolgirls still being held by Boko Haram. Despite 8 years of suffering, these mothers have agreed to have 108 faces of Chibok girls being sculpted for posterity.
I'm more than happy today because I think even it's not by this year, even for next year or another second next year, even after 10 years, I'm expecting my daughter coming out because of molding of this thing.
Prue Nuri is directing this performance. The visual artist is inspired by the Yoruba craftsmen of the 15th century. She shows the right gestures to these Nigerian students. The world-renowned sculptor, Prue has been working on this project for many years, before collaborating with the University of Ile-Ife and its Department of Fine Arts.
I wanted this project to happen in Ife, but I didn't know which artisans to work with. There are no craftsmen here anymore. But the university made sense. We fell in love with the art department professors who have an incredible philosophy.
These 108 heads of Chibok girls express a strong message against male domination. And this installation is essential according to this young woman. Amina Nkeki is the first former Chibok schoolgirl to have escaped from the Boko Haram den. She fears the indifference around the fate of the Chibok girls still held hostage.
I feel it to be helpful for them because when everybody in the world see these things, they'll still have, so people are still talking about these Chibok girls, even though that government has been quiet for now. It's not talking about our Chibok girls.
Prue Nuri wants to break that silence. These 108 clay heads will travel across Europe, America, and Africa so that the memory of the Chibok girls isn't lost to history.
Well, that's it for Eye in Africa for now. Thanks for joining us. Do so again. Take care.